Okay, this is video 34 part 2. So, yeah, I've been talking about partial recovery. Now, logically, partial recovery is definitely better than no recovery. Whether that's a cult or, even people coming off drugs or drink or immorality or whatever it is. Partial recovery is certainly better than no recovery. But that we all have blind spots. Is it for myself? There's several issues. Even though I help other people out of cults, I've still got issues myself. you know, you'd assume the person helping other people out of cults, oh, they must have no problems in their life at all. No, it doesn't work that way. Um, Right, going on to this bit. If I read a book, follow an influencer, do what the Forex guru trader tells me to do what the leader in the multi level marketing group tells me what to do, something outside the cult, then my life will be perfect. Right? When I finally left religion and left the cult, it was around 2015, 2016, fully left. I was looking for other things to do. And then I got conned by one of these trader influencer gurus and I lost a lot of money. And I assumed that if I leave a cult and then I try something new, well, life will just work out. God will see me through. And I still believed in a God at that time. I thought, oh, thank you, God, you found me what I was looking for. There's this guru, they're going to teach me how to make 10% a month on stocks and shares, and life will be perfect. And you're out of one bad situation and then into another bad situation. Some people, after they leave a cult, one of my friends, they got married, they got a better job, they've got 2 kids now, and life is good. And they've left a cult and they're in a healthy church that is not an abusive group, and they've done well. Other people that I've known, there's so many different situations. There was one guy I knew in the cult pretty much the whole time I was there, from 1995 up till about 2013, 2015. And he just left the cult a year or so ago, about 2 years ago. So he was there a lot longer than I was, but when I left the cult and started getting people out of the cult, obviously the cult didn't like that, and he still looks at me as, oh, I'm a bad person because I was getting people out of the cult. Now, he might not feel that way when he figures out that actually I'm trying to do good. But for now, it's like you've met somebody who knew you in the cult, and this is why sometimes helping cult members doesn't work, because you knew that person in the cult, and now you're trying to help that person out the cult, but it doesn't work out. So there can be issues like that as well. What I have noticed when I look back on sort of ICOC cult type experience was that a lot of the people who were leaders in the group, sort of low level leaders, right? They got married, they had kids. So many of them got divorced. And at the time you'd look at them and you'd think, oh, they're doing all right. But you don't know what their marriage is really like, and yeah, that surprised me because I thought, oh, they seem happy, they'll last forever, whether they're in or out the group. And no, even within the group, people can get divorced. When they leave, they can get divorced, or some people, they stay happily married. you know, it, it this fantasy that everybody leaves the cult and eventually everything gets sorted out isn't reality. We'd like to think that is the case. You might have an issue. I don't know. I've got an issue with my feet, and I've got this sort of athlete's foot stuff that never sort of goes away. And you go and see one doctor, and they say, oh, try this stuff. Yeah, I've tried that stuff. and then they'll just sort of make it up. Oh well, maybe we'll give you this, and that doesn't work either. And you think, well, there's no point going to see the doctor. I mean, in the UK, it is good that there is a sort of national health service free, but a lot of people spend a lot of money on doctors and they don't get better. The same can happen even with cult exit counselling. It's like, well, if I spend enough money, then I'll eventually be perfect. No. I mean, it really is a spectrum of people. There is no book to read and then all the problems will go away. Even people who go to church and they believe in their religious books, that their religious books are the only books they read. And then there's certain issues in their life and they think, well, no, it must be in the Bible. And it's like, well, why don't you get yourself a different book? Oh, no, it'd be in the Bible. Yeah, but you're trying to learn maths. Why don't you get yourself a maths book, or relationships or whatever. Anyway, I want to only do part 1 and part 2. I don't want this video to be a part 3, but I've got a lot to say about this. It might be a 3-part video, this one. So relationships in a cult. Yeah, I mean, when I got recruited in 1995, from not having that many friends and knowing a few people at work, suddenly they're all over you. It's known as love bombing, yeah? And it's like, wow, I've got so many friends. And I thought to myself, oh, well, I'm probably going to get married within a year, because even though I was very geeky, put me in a group of people who are easy to get on with, and suddenly people can flourish. I'd been raised a Catholic, didn't really know anyone in the Catholic Church. They weren't particularly social, and then suddenly in this Protestant cult, boom, suddenly I got loads of friends. It's like certain plants will flourish in certain soils, but put them in a different soil, some plants like dry, some plants like moist. When I was in the Catholic Church, even though I was raised in the Catholic Church, went to Catholic school, primary and secondary school, I really didn't have that many friends, and then in the cult, suddenly I believed I had loads of friends, but it's an illusion. It's an illusion. Cult leaders deliberately make it, make the group, I was listening to this Sunday service by this cult leader in London, Michael Williamson, London ICC, notorious as a cult leader, but he can construct a group that is very friendly, does fun things, does sports, does entertainment, and you think, oh, that seems like a good group to be part of. So why do most people leave within the first year? But when you actually listen to the guy and how he sort of really attacks the audience, attacks the members of the cult. Oh, you guys, you need to recruit more. You need to encourage the preacher more. So creating this sort of illusion of a church that is the perfect church. And a lot of cults, certainly the bigger cults, can become all-consuming. They've got their dating websites within the cult. Do you want to find another Mormon? Kind of thing. Or, that they've got their own little football leagues. One of the things that I found in the cult, I made friends with a couple of people and they liked to watch football and they liked to do a sport, and I got into this sport and my friend in the cult, oh, you want to try this sport? Oh, I love it. I never even knew about it. So you can flourish within a cult, even though a cult is a bad thing. Because obviously there's all the abuse, all the manipulation, all the brainwashing going on, right? But some people can actually flourish in a cult environment. I got a job. You know, I didn't get a girlfriend. I almost got a girlfriend, but some people, they wouldn't find a wife because they got issues, but in a cult they did find a wife, and then they probably would get divorced anyway. But you know, a cult is a sort of, it promises you everything, and people will say, well, I never would have got a girlfriend outside the group, or I never would have come off drink or drugs unless it was the group. You know, and I've known people, you know, that there was one guy who became an evangelist in ICOC, right? Before the cult, he was a heavy drinker, right? And, you know, he's still in the cult. But he's programmed to think if he leaves the cult, then he's going to go back to drink again. And there's stories of people who, oh, well, John left the cult and then he went back to drink and drugs again. He couldn't handle it in the real world. He went back to the cult and they threatened him with hell, you know, if he wouldn't stop drinking. So Scientology, they're notorious for their sort of drug rehabilitation kind of almost torture. People call it some of the, but oh, unless somebody tortures me, then I'm going to do bad things. You know, oh, I'll be a good person if I'm tortured to be a good person. There's issues. Clearly, the person wants to be a good person, but the methods the cult are using really are very abusive. You know, and it's like tying somebody up with lots of different ropes. You know, the rope of friendship or the rope of purpose, and they might cut themselves free from. Well, I could find friends outside the group, but then they're trapped by doctrine. You know, so getting people out of a cult, some will go back. You know, it's like a cult tries to tick all the boxes. Right, that person has purpose. Right, that person is working. You know, so they will encourage people to get work, but only for the agenda of the cult. Is it good that somebody's working rather than not working? It could be. You know, but if they're only working to make money for the cult, it's sad, isn't it? And this sort of dynamic, you know, some people are always doubting. It's like, oh, maybe what the cult was teaching was true. Maybe I'm going to hell, and they try and find another group, but they haven't resolved the issue of, hang on a minute, you can't prove whether there's a God or a devil or heaven and hell in the first place. You know, so when it comes to cult recovery, obviously, you know, it's highly unlikely that somebody will solve all their problems in parallel in a very short period of time. You know, I was talking, I think, in a previous, this part one, or A, I guess, A or B, about somebody who I knew who left the cult, they found a healthy church, they got married, they got kids, and life is good. But they have subtle issues. Subtle issues. You know, they're still a bit religious elitist. They still, you know, think they're better than everybody else. But they're doing well. You know. Right, I really want to work through this. I think we're going to do a part B and a part C, aren't we? Right, I think, yeah, I've kind of covered most of it, but I'll read the notes and then do a final part